Thank you all for being here. My opening remarks are going to be very brief because I want it to be focused on our two programs for this session. So the last hour or so, we've been focused on campus and with the honor system. We're going to do a little bit of pivot. We're going to go off campus and talk about some current culture and the current politics state, and which is very timely with the Democratic debate last night. So this session is going to be broken into two segments. The first segment, we have the honor of hearing from Professor Bob Strong and Professor Brian Alexander talking about our current state, the current White House, a little bit about Trump, kind of what's going on. And then we're gonna switch and we're going to talk about what might be coming up. We're going to bring up 4 of our mock convention students from Mock Convention 2020, and they're going to talk about what has been going on with their planning for Mock Convention, which is this February. And I've had the fortunate time to travel with these students around to some of our alumni chapters where they've given pretty much their show on the road, and I know they're very thankful for you all coming here so they don't have to travel to hear that. So that is my bit. I'm going to turn it over to the professionals here and tell us what's going on in the White House.
Well, I plan to speak for just a few minutes to you, and I want to say some, I think, fairly obvious things about those of us who are looking ahead at the 2020 presidential contest. If you follow politics carefully, and I know many of the people in the audience do, I doubt if I will say anything that surprises you. But as you know, I'm a college professor, and saying obvious things to captured audiences is actually what I do for a living. And it's about the only thing these days I know how to do. And let me begin with this observation. If you were looking at modern presidential elections, and one could define the timeline for that in different ways, but let's say modern presidential elections from Harry Truman on, the last 70 years, the lifespan of Donald Trump and half the Democrats who are seeking the nomination. If you looked at what has transpired in that series of elections, I think you would predict that Donald Trump has an excellent chance to win a second term. Most presidents in that period of time did win a second term. Eisenhower did, Nixon did, Reagan did, Clinton did, and of course, both of Trump's predecessors in this century. That's the typical arrangement in modern presidential electoral behavior. Where there have been exceptions, and there have been exceptions, there are 2 broad explanations for the failure to win a second term. And they, again, are known to all of us. Truman and Lyndon Johnson could each have run for an additional term and chose not to. And they largely chose not to because they were presidents during long, drawn-out, and controversial wars, Korea and Vietnam, that had reduced their popularity and made their chances for re-election less promising. The other 2 sitting presidents who did seek a second term and lost, Jimmy Carter and Herbert Walker Bush, both faced difficult economic realities. For Carter, it was a matter of high inflation, higher than usual unemployment, and high interest rates with a Federal Reserve that was trying to crack down on the problem of inflation. That was a difficult combination. He had run in 1976 by reminding Americans about the misery index, what happens if you add together the inflation rate and unemployment. Unfortunately, when he ran for re-election, the misery index was actually higher than it had been when he took office. For George Herbert Walker Bush, there had been a recession in 1991. We were coming out of it as we were going to the polls in 1992. But the better times had not yet been felt by voters. And as we all know, the economy was an important issue in that election cycle, and he also lost his bid for re-election. If you count Kennedy and Johnson as a team, there's one more of those cases of a political party winning two presidential contests in a row. That would look like the norm. So if Trump is coming up, if he's seeking a second term, and if he can bring to the table peace and prosperity, his chances for re-election by that historical record would look promising. But of course, it's Donald Trump, and nothing is normal, and it's worth revisiting that question with a few more points of importance from our historical experience. First of all, the quintessential peace and prosperity presidents, like Eisenhower, never had a public approval rating that fell below 50%. Donald Trump has never had a public approval rating that rose above 50%. He's the only modern occupant of the White House to hold that distinction. But it's not Donald Trump alone. For much of the period of time I'm talking about, if you looked at presidential approval ratings, they tend to track economic performance. They don't track economic performance of the country perfectly. Special events can lead to drops and rises in presidential approval. George W. Bush got one at about the time of 9/11. Richard Nixon's Watergate problems made his approval rating disconnected from whatever the performance of the economy was. But in normal times, presidents tend to rise and fall in the esteem of the public and voters based on the broad economic performance. That's no longer happening. Neither Barack Obama nor Donald Trump has had a significant rise in their approval from the American public with the recovery that was finally achieved after the 2008 recession. Perhaps that recovery was too slow in coming. Perhaps that recovery was too uneven in its consequence. But for whatever reason, both Obama and Trump have had middling presidential approval ratings. For Obama, they hang around the upper 40s, the lower 50s, and don't have huge spikes up or huge spikes down. For Trump, it's been in the upper 30s to low and mid 40s, and again, without much account of the overall performance of the economy. Is that because we live in a far more partisan period of time in which Democrats will never give Trump credit for anything, even a successful economy, and on the other hand, Republicans will never give Obama credit for the success that was eventually achieved in the recovery from the Great Recession. Are we forever into the future looking at presidents who are going to be seen more than usual through a partisan lens? Maybe. There's another reality to the upcoming election that I think is worth thinking about. We haven't had a dramatic party victory in a presidential contest since Ronald Reagan's re-election in 1984. We had in that period of time two respectable victories. Herbert Walker Bush is going to win in 88 by 53%. Obama in 2008 is going to win by 53%. All the rest of the results are much, much narrower. And of course, we've had two presidents who won the White House without winning the popular vote. We all live in the margin of error. In any given presidential election cycle, it's plausible to see a path to victory for either of the political parties. If that remains true, it's harder to predict what the outcome is going to be in 2020. Now, you sometimes hear a counter argument, particularly from Democrats and their supporters. In 6 of the last 7 presidential contests, the Democratic candidate has won the popular vote. Only once did a Republican win the popular vote, and that, of course, was George W. Bush running for re-election, who wins a 51% victory. Is it the case that there is an emerging Democratic majority in national politics driven by demographic changes that we've all heard about and followed, and that the long-term trend is going to be for a rising success rate for Democratic candidates in presidential politics? That's been talked about. It was predicted that that was going to be the decisive factor in 2016. Of course, it was not. Even if such a demographic shift is on the way, I think we'd be safe in predicting in 2020 that it's not yet here. And let me just close and turn the microphone and podium over to my colleague Brian Alexander with a sad observation that I suspect many of you share. I think the next presidential election cycle will be among the uglier ones in American political experience. That's going to occur because the division between the two parties is as close as it is. That's going to occur because of the current occupant of the White House and the style of politics that he practices. And I hope that all of us can try to think of ways that we as citizens can somehow contribute to some improvement or elevation in our political process. If I am partially responsible for that as a college professor, I have good news for you. You're soon going to meet some of our students, the ones who are working hard on the mock convention process. When you hear from them, you're going to have a higher level of trust in America's political future. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Alexander, professor of politics. This is my 3rd year at Washington and Lee University, so I like to call myself a junior. I want to thank Bo and Tom, Kelly, and the others for organizing this event, and also to thank the audience in particular. As this is my 3rd year at WNL, I look at the place fresh all the time, and one of the things that makes this such a wonderful place is the enthusiasm of the alumni. And your being here today is a demonstration of that. And that kind of spirit and passion for Washington and Lee University is the kind of thing that I try to pass on to my students, and certainly contagious, because I've experienced it in the time I've been here. And even when I first got the job, I had a WNL hat on in Washington, D.C., and people would corner me and they'd say, "When did you graduate?" And I said, I didn't, I haven't even been there yet. But it's a wonderful place, and it's in no small part because of you all being here today. So thank you. My favorite answer to the question on whether Trump will be reelected is that I don't know, and we should go eat. But the more serious answer is that we may not know, but as Professor Strong pointed to, there are some historic predictors that we can look to get a sense of the president's re-electability. And Professor Strong spoke to many of the things that I'll recap, I think, somewhat now. So if you want a perspective, if you omit a couple of exceptions, since FDR, every president has been re-elected. presidents get reelected is a phenomenon in modern American politics. To have a little more perspective, the students that will be joining us on stage in a minute have never had a one-term president during their lifetimes. So reelection is something that presidents do, and they do quite regularly. How do we explain this? Professor Strong touched on some of the key things. In broad swaths, the leading predictors are tied to the performance on the economy and public approval. Another thing that factors in usually is whether or not how long the party in power has been in power. So, which is to say, a party can't hold the presidency for more than 3 terms. So if you take these predictors and all the analysis and reams of paper and statistics the political scientists have put together, it shows that basically if the economy is going well, Trump's chances of winning are high. If the economy stalls or the economy tanks, Trump's chances are lower. His approval rating, always historically low and currently around 42%, is a drag on his overall reelectability. But if the economy is going well, and this is only 1 term into a Republican presidency, you get a sense that Trump's chances of reelection, irrespective of what the candidates on stage said last night, they're not small. It's Professor Strong, and we didn't trade remarks much, but we have very similar observations, and I don't think we're going to be alone in saying that the Trump presidency is far from normal. It's been, if anything, an unconventional presidency. Trump generates a lot of noise on the left and the right in an already polarized political environment. Separating out that signal from the noise, putting aside the daily tweet storms and the media hyperventilation, is one of the big challenges. And it makes us ask in this environment where if you do turn on MSNBC or Fox or have mercy on you if you get your information from social media. There's just noise and screaming every day about the latest phenomenon in the White House, the latest happening, and people on Capitol Hill and around the country would have us focus on that constantly. So the puzzle for a professor of political scientists, general observers, I think average Americans, is how much does any of this matter? I mean, we did elect a reality TV star to be president, so I don't think we thought it would be boring. But how much is the day-to-day sort of noise that's happening important? What does it say about the direction of the country? And then ultimately, of course, the question we all want to know is what does it say about who's going to be the next president? So I try to give perspective, and it's difficult. It's just admittedly difficult. When Trump was elected on the political science sort of message boards and among emails, and you go to conferences, people would say, oh my gosh, what do we say now? This sort of upturns a lot of what we thought a president should be or how presidents act or who would get elected. No, but for a couple of outliers, nobody predicted that Trump would win. So a lot of us found ourselves saying, well, what will this all mean? And how is this going to affect us in the long term? And whether it's 2021, January 2021, or January 2024, what are we all going to be saying about what did this president mean for the United States and the world? Asking that question in real time is difficult. Partisans offer very passionate responses. Republicans and Democrats will give you different responses about what the Trump presidency means. Trump supporters and Trump opponents are going to give you different answers. It's very hard to have a civil, if you do go to, just open up social media and try to have a civil conversation about what the Trump presidency means, it's very difficult to do. Every campaign cycle, people always say the next election is the most important one. And so maybe it is. But how do we get at what's really at stake? And I'm going to be honest, it's a tough one. We still are puzzling what is at stake in this election. There's no perfect way to answer this question in real time. But I think one way that I'm trying to get at it is to consider what mattered to Americans before Trump came on the scene. What matters to them now, and how much of this, if anything, has changed because of Trump. So for a thought experiment on that, I looked at the Pew Research Center's polling on public policy priorities. These are the issues that are most important to Americans. And I looked at them in January 2016, before Trump clinched the Republican nomination, and I looked at what matters to Americans in 2019, 3 years into the Trump presidency. And perhaps no surprise, the economy tops out at number one in both of those periods, 2016, 2019. But what's more interesting, I think, is that most of the remaining top 10 public policy priorities among Americans are almost identical from before the time that Trump came on to the political scene. Terrorism, education, jobs, Social Security, healthcare costs, Medicare, reducing crime, the poor and the needy. All of these things registered above 50% as the public policy priorities of the American public, both before Donald Trump clinched the Republican nomination and came to dominate the airwaves, and in 2019, 3 years into his presidency. In the 18 issues identified in the Pew poll, only 3 appear in 2019 that were not present in 2016. Drug addiction, race relations, and transportation. It's hard to see where Donald Trump is responsible for drug addiction and transportation becoming priorities. The opioid crisis has been brewing for a long time. We've heard for years about the need for increased investment on transportation and infrastructure. But in this post-Charlottesville, build the wall era, maybe it is no surprise that race relations are more on Americans' minds after this presidency. One has to question whether a 17% increase in hate crimes the first year of the Trump presidency is just a coincidence. And this question of race is a big one. The wounds in this country run deep, and we're not as healed as many of us might have thought. And Donald Trump is probably not helping to heal those wounds. But overall, I think this look at issues about what we care about cuts through some of the broader noise, some of the daily drama, and it suggests that after 3 years of Trump, Americans largely care about the same stuff today as we did before he became president. And I think that's heartening. In a way, it says that we still disagree about the stuff we've always disagreed about, and that while there may have been some changes and there's a lot of noise, if we had hope in 2016 that we might cut through some of that and arrive at solutions, that we still can. And that whatever the daily drama is not something that's perhaps forever changing us or ultimately changing the things we think about and care about as Americans. But finally, the election outcome depends on who the Democrats nominate. Do they put forward a centrist candidate that can win Democratic voters, independents, and peel off some Republicans in the general election? Do they put forward a left-leaning candidate that motivates the Democratic base? Or is broader Trump fatigue so great that almost no matter who the Democrats put forward, like we saw in the 2018 midterm election, do people turn out in droves, in big numbers, to vote against this president? I'll close by saying what I said at the beginning, which is that I don't know, but I'm very happy to now turn the stage over to our mock con students who are going to offer wonderful perspective on all of this. So thank you all.
Hello, everyone. Does it sound all good? Can everybody hear me? Well, thank you all for coming to this panel and hearing us speak. We're looking forward to talking a little bit about the 2020 mock convention. My name is Jimmy Fleck, and I'm the general chair, so I have the great honor of leading the 27th WNL mock convention. And we're really hoping to do this one right, as so many have done before. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues real quick to introduce themselves, and then we can really kind of dive into the topic at hand.
My name is Elizabeth Thompson, and I'm the financial chair for Mock Convention 2020, and I'm a neuroscience major from Arlington, Texas.
I'm Valerie Marshall. I'm the Northeast Regional Chair within the Political Department. I am from Arlington, Virginia, and I'm a Politics and Philosophy double major, Environmental Studies minor.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Harashinski. I'm a senior from Long Beach Island, New Jersey, and I'm the political chair for Mock Convention 2020. And we are so happy to be at this panel and have you all here to talk more about politics. And that key question Professor Alexander talked about is whether or not Democrats want somebody to come and beat Trump or to espouse their own values. And we're looking forward to diving into that later on.
So the way we're going to start this off is first, Elizabeth and I are going to speak a little bit about how the mock convention runs, kind of what students at large have been up to thus far, and then we'll turn it over to Valerie and John, and they can really kind of dive into the politics of everything. So the 27th mock convention has been off to a pretty good start. Actually, just about a week ago, we signed up a lot of the students. Everybody came out for the delegates fair, and they joined delegates of all 57 states and territories. And right now we've got a little bit over 16,000 total members of the mock convention. So we're really excited to just kind of get the entire student body involved. One of my favorite things about mock convention is getting to interact with students that I may not have met otherwise, getting to interact with alumni, members of the faculty that I would not have gotten to otherwise, because really what mock convention is it's the whole campus, the whole community really coming together, unifying to make the big prediction, bring in a bunch of great speakers, and really just kind of have a great time as one big WNL community. And that's kind of really what our mission is, and what really drives us forward is really bringing everybody together and to get this done right. So we're really hoping it goes well this time. And as John is going to be able to tell you, it's not going to be an easy one. So. So to kind of cover what the breakdown is, we really try to run mock convention in some ways like a company. We used to say it was like a small business, except it was run by all 20 and 21-year-olds, and now it just feels like a regular business run by 20 and 21-year-olds. So we've got 5 different departments. So there's the general department, which is myself, as well as Lane Smith, our general secretary, who's in the back over there. And so really what our jobs are is kind of leading the mock convention and facilitating our kind of internal communication, make sure that everybody's really working together, make sure everything just continues to run smoothly. Then we have our communications department, and they're kind of like the marketing team, and they've put together our website, which if you want to check it out, it's mockconvention.com. It looks wonderful. They've put together a lot of great publications. We've got a newsletter that has been going out. Everything from name tags to signs. It's really incredible kind of seeing students put together things that, I've had people come up to me and tell me, it looks like it's a real company putting these things out. And I actually had someone come up to me and say, if anybody in your communications department wants a job, let me know. So that was pretty impressive. That is one of the good things about mock convention is giving students experiences that they can take out into the real world, which I think is pretty cool. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. She'll talk a little bit about the kind of the operations department, some of the events we're doing, as well as the financial department, and then we'll kind of work towards turning it over to the politics folks.
Right, so we have our operations department, which is responsible for pretty much every event in our mock convention cycle. So we just had our spring kickoff last spring term, where we had a weekend full of events. We had John Heilman come speak right here on this stage. And it's just a great way to kick off mock convention and get everyone really excited. So the operations department also is going to be putting on the Presidential Gala in November, where we've heard it's like fancy dress, but bigger and better. So we are just so excited to get everyone super energized for the convention through the gala. And then, of course, we have the convention itself, which will be this February, coming up pretty soon. And as far as, you've probably all noticed that the gym is currently not really there. And so that was kind of a hurdle that we got to jump through this cycle. So the convention this year will be held in the Duchessois Tennis Center. We have explored a lot of options and thought that it would be best to keep mock convention on W&L ground. And we're very excited for the tennis center. It's going to be a great space. Really looking forward to the convention there. So we also have coming the financial department, which is my department, and it's kind of broken up two different ways. We have the financial controller, Caitlin Brock, who handles all of our day-to-day business, receipts, everything that we pay for, from name tags to speakers. That's kind of that side of the department. And then we have the other side where Parker Catlett is our fundraising chair, and we go on trips across the country, like Tom mentioned, and we are gearing up for about 8 more trips in the fall. So if you are in any of those cities, they'll be up on our website, and we'd love for you to come out and see us. As far as our sources of capital go, we have about a budget of just under $1 million, and about 46% of that comes from private contributions. About 21% of that comes from our MockCon endowment. 18% comes from memorabilia sales. Our 10% comes from our executive committee allocation that we ask for each year. And then 5% comes from various other sources. And kind of a breakdown of how that dollar is spent, if you're interested, about 62 cents of that dollar goes to our operations department in order to put on all the events each cycle. And then about 24 cents of that goes towards bringing incredible speakers to campus that can give our political team and the campus at large just a really great idea of what's going on in the Democratic Party. And the rest of that dollar is split between the political team, the communications team, and the financial team to carry out day-to-day business.
So one of the kind of my favorite things is, hearing from alumni about how things have changed. Now we've got, we'll be spending close to $1 million on this thing. And, I remember I spoke to the treasurer of, I believe it was the either 1972 or 1976 mock convention. And he said that their year was the first year they got some money from the school, and they had a budget of about $10,000. So it's really interesting. I love hearing all the hearing stories too from alumni about what made their mock convention special, and we can definitely kind of get into that a little bit later. And I'm sure I'll see you all around campus too. So kind of to talk a little bit more about alumni involvement, we really want mock convention to be a whole community thing, and that's not just students, not just people in the town of Lexington, but that really means alumni too. Everybody that kind of has a connection to W&L, we really want them to have some sort of involvement. So one of the best ways to do that, and John can talk a little bit more about this, is if you've got thoughts on the political race, if you've got friends in journalism or politics that are working on this right now, we love these kinds of connections, and it also helps us get speakers because working through speakers bureaus can be a little expensive sometimes. So, if your best friend was the President of the United States, we'd love to hear that, so we can bring him in. So those are all great ways. And then, of course, we're going to be holding a silent auction during Parents' Weekend. So if you have any kind of gifts you'd like to provide, or financial contributions, of course, always help. As E.T. said, it's a very big part of it. And you can find more information on our website if you're curious. And you can always ask me too if you've got any other questions. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Valerie and John, and they can kind of speak a little bit more about the politics of this cycle, and then we can open everything up for a little bit of Q&A.
Nice, thanks, Jimmy. So the final department we're going to talk about today is the political department. Now, you may be able to extrapolate from the name that we cover everything political that goes on with the convention, and you would be correct. Our overall mission for the political department is to emulate the actual Democratic National Convention, which is going to happen in Milwaukee in July. So ranging from the platform that they will present in Milwaukee to the speakers who may be there, and even the nominee, that all funnels under our purview, and we are very excited to get going on that task. But it's no small feat, really. On just the nomination side, we have over 80 undergraduate student analysts ready and willing to consume every piece of polling, FEC filing sheet, endorsement, you name it, from all 57 delegations that we can then look at to see what's going to go on the overall. On the platform side, we have a phenomenal platform team who is doing their best to research what are going to be the most pressing issues for the Democrats leading into 2020. And then finally, on the speakers front, we have an amazing team there as well, making connections and trying to figure out what issues will be prominent, working with platform team, figure out what issues will be prominent in Milwaukee, and trying to find speakers who will come and have a conversation about that to the student body, which we are excited to do. In my capacity as political chair, I have the great honor to lead this entire department in our mission to emulate the convention, and it is truly incredible, especially with the delegates fair that Jimmy was talking about earlier. So almost 1,600 students came out and wanted to join mock convention. They were so excited for it, and for us, that is truly humbling to lead such an organization where the students are buying in and really want to participate. So with that, I'll let Valerie speak more about her role as the Northeast Regional Chair and talk more about how primaries have transformed over time and the challenges that now this new primary in 2020 will present to mock convention, and I'll talk more on how we plan to tackle that.
Thanks, John. So as I said earlier, I am the Northeast Regional Chair. I'm one of 7 regional chairs within the political department. And just to give you a greater insight into our predictive team, so we have John, the political chair that oversees the national team, the local team, and the platform team. So the regional chairs are all each heads of the local team. So we oversee the 57 state and territory chairs who are then in charge of the broader student delegations. Our main job is to manage our state chairs within our region and specifically to guide their research efforts, since that's going to be the most important part of their job. So it is their job to do the on-the-ground, very hyper-local research, while we are more analyzing that research, taking a bit of a step back from it to provide that broader perspective. So as Northeast Regional Chair, the states under my direction include New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. It's been a really interesting region to lead thus far, especially for a Democratic prediction, given how it's one of the most liberal areas in the country. And we also have a lot of candidates coming from the region, including Sanders, Warren, de Blasio, and formerly Gillibrand. And also, I just think New York is going to be really important to our prediction, just given its sheer size and number of delegates. And New Hampshire will also be a great test for us, since it is the only primary that occurs before our mock convention is actually held. So moving over to the brief history of the Democratic primary. So initially, presidential nominations were completely controlled by party elites. Primary votes were non-binding, so delegate allocation was actually not based upon voter preference, and often top contenders weren't even on the primary ballots for a presidential race. This began to change in 1968 after the chaos surrounding that Democratic convention that year. The Democratic Party decided to change its rules due to outrage over voters not feeling they really had a say in their party. And so since then, they began to bind primary votes to delegate allocation. And since that convention, primary elites have been having less and less control over who the presidential nominee will be for them, and it's been more up to the voters. So some of the changes that the DNC has made since '68 have been how they awarded delegates, in terms that the party has been switching to proportional allocation from previous winner-take-all states, because doing so gives underdog candidates a fair shot at winning and makes the electorate feel that their vote is worth more. The sequence of state primaries has also evolved over time. So while Iowa and New Hampshire have traditionally held some of the earliest primaries, we have seen states trying to move up in the primary schedule, such as Nevada and South Carolina, because doing so gives their state more importance and more press coverage. So now what that's all combined to in the 2020 primary, and what's going to make it a really unique primary, is that since 2016, superdelegates no longer have first ballot voting rights. So that's going to change in that it's even more in the voters' hands. There are no more party elites who get to vote on that first ballot. And also, California's primary has been moved up to Super Tuesday. Given that it's the largest state, it's going to be huge that now they have such an important and prominent place in the primary schedule. So that's just a nice overview of the Democratic primary. So we're going to turn over to John, and he's going to discuss how that fits into our predictive strategy.
Right, so as the states have begun to realign and really form coalitions, especially on Super Tuesday, they carry a different kind of weight in primaries past, especially with the superdelegates now being theoretically out of the equation. Of course, if it was a contested convention, we'll have to factor in the superdelegates, so we're hoping it's not, because that'll be a lot more work on our end. But essentially, we've had to revamp our entire predictive strategy because of this, and also from looking at 2016 and understanding the role of social media and really data analytics, we've really wanted to incorporate all different facets of 16 to capture what is going to happen in 2020. And to do that, we've to come up with something known as, well, we like to call the Trident Strategy. And the idea is that by taking three distinct viewpoints, from the national level, looking at national trends at a 30,000-foot view, combining that with local research on the ground in the states, what voters are saying, what journalists are saying, academics, party officials, what they're seeing. If we take those two and combine it with our brand new data analytics team covering demographic changes, social media engagements, different events that are covered and the frequency that they're happening, the idea is that if we combine all three of those together, we will come to one cohesive prediction, and we'll be able to accurately distribute all 4,765 delegates to the actual Democratic National Convention. Distributing all those delegates have never been done once in mock convention, but in 2020, that'll be the first time that we're going to get all of them where they're supposed to belong, or so we hope. But the big thing for us moving forward, and the key question that we need to ask ourselves, is how do we quantify momentum? Because quite often in these primary nominee contests, momentum is a way to secure your spot. If a candidate wins Iowa and New Hampshire, let's say, well, maybe their chance of winning South Carolina and Nevada increase, and then the domino effect continues down the line, leading all the way to the convention. So we need to figure out, how do we quantify that momentum and the intensity of voters? Who's going to go out there in Iowa winter to their local middle school and sit there and vouch for their candidate? Who has the biggest base of that? And we've really come to find this matrix of factors that we need to look at, which include polling and fundraising numbers, the size of the campaigns, and how active they are in each state. Social media presence and engagements is also something we want to look at, in addition to endorsements from both elected officials and party officials, which is really no small task, but thankfully with the help of now 1,600 members of the undergraduate student body, we're ready and willing to get this thing done, and we are very excited to do so. And so, as Jimmy said, as part of our effort to quantify momentum, especially in the endorsements category or in understanding what is happening at that ground level, if you know anybody who is active in these states, active in local politics at the local level, we would love to have a conversation with them. And so that's something that we're trying to make a forefront of our local research, is making those contacts and those connections. And if you have anybody in mind, I'd be more than happy to talk to you after this panel about it. But that's pretty much the challenge that we're facing heading into 2020. We are more than excited. We're less than 6 months away to our prediction. It's exciting to do it before Super Tuesday, because we really get the recognition that we are coming out and calling it, and more often than not, we've been right. I mean, we've only been wrong twice since 1948. We have a lot of a reputation to uphold, and we are excited to get going. So with that, I'd be more than happy, along with everybody else on the panel, to take some questions and hopefully answer any curiosities that you guys may have. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, okay. The remarkable success of the mock convention in predicting realistically who's going to be the nominee is phenomenal. And from what I'm hearing tonight, yeah, I think you guys are going to be phenomenal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, do you have a full academic load as well as what you are doing, and how do you balance that?
You know, that is a great question. All of us have full academic loads this term, and you know, some of us, like me, we're just taking electives this term, which is nice, to take the burden off. But yes, we sometimes amaze ourselves that we could balance a full-time workload other extracurriculars, and mock convention at the same time. I don't know how we do it. If you guys know how you guys do it,
I can speak a little bit to that. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a neuroscience major on the pre-med track, and that has been one of the challenges, is kind of balancing mock convention, which is a full-time job, with my academic course load. But I can guarantee that, John and Jimmy and I were actually hired our freshman year for a convention that wasn't happening until 3 years in the future. So we've had a lot of time to kind of work our way up from having kind of a smaller load of mock convention duties and kind of build our way to where we are now. So we kind of have it down by now, the system of academics in MockCon, but we're all really passionate about mock convention, so it hasn't really been a burden or too much of a challenge to really get it going.
And I think the big thing, at least for me, is that the students of W&L are so capable that if I don't really have to worry about if I'm not able to do something, there's somebody else that's going to be there that can pick up my slack when I need it, and that when they've got a job interview, I'll be there to pick up whatever they've got to do. That I have complete faith in the entire team that if something needs to get done, it'll get done, and I don't really have to worry about there being any weak links in our team, which is, I think, one of the great things about the W&L student body is how capable everybody is. The mock convention is February 14th and 15th. We'll have a little bit of a kind of starting event the 13th, as well as a finishing one the 16th. But the speakers themselves will be here February 14th and 15th. And as John said, that's very early in the primary process, which is part of what makes it so interesting, is that we're guessing on, we're making our prediction on so many of these states that we don't have the actual numbers from yet.
The Democratic Party has sort of winnowed the field, at least for the debates. How are you handling what they consider to be fringe candidates, or those that haven't made the cut?
Well, right now, we're still handling them as if they made the debates, so to speak. As of right now, the field is still at 20 candidates, which, by the way, is the most amount of candidates we've ever had in a primary field for either party. So we're going to keep following them until they drop out. And that's pretty much our mantra. We take them seriously if they take themselves seriously. And we're going to try our best to not let anything slip through the cracks, even if they did not make the debate stage.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that in our MockCon room, we've got a big whiteboard, and we've got all the candidates broken down into different categories. People that kind of at the top that are really in the running, and then people that were a little confused as to why they're running.
To give you some clarification on that tier system, we have our top dogs at number 1, we have our contenders at number 2, we have dark horses at number 3, and our 4th category is simply labeled who? Sorry.
Let him go.
All right. How about an advance notice on who some of the speakers are going to be?
Well, we gotta, we're keeping it under wraps for now, and of course, politicians are a little tough to nail down this far out. But we've already got some pretty strong leads and some couple, pretty strong names that have said they want to come. So we'll be releasing that kind of as we get closer to the convention. So you can keep an eye out on the mock convention website. But it's, I got my fingers crossed. I think it's going to shape up to be a pretty strong year. So, but yeah, not releasing any yet.
You can trust us. We believe in the honor system.
It's not you that I'm worried about. It's the people on the live stream.
Are you working with the political science professors at all, or the department on MockCon, or are they not part of the process and kind of worthless?
So one of the great things about mock convention is that it's an entirely student-led process. Traditionally, Professor Connolly has maintained quite a bit of distance from himself from the convention, and he's there if we would like help, but he's never there offering help unless we want to ask for it. So with Professor Connolly's retirement, we have been working with professors in the politics department, but it's more of like we want to go and ask them a question, not the other way around, which is nice that they respect it's a student-run organization, which I think makes it so unique. That we're the ones driving the research, we're the ones coming to the conclusion, and if we need help, it's always available, and that is really nice to know that we could always turn to the experts in the field to get their opinion on something.
If there's nobody else, I'll make a comment. My father was the chairman of the Kentucky delegation in the most dramatic of all the picks in 1924. If you know anything about the history of the mock convention, that was the one where we really pulled it out of the intestines. That was the 1924 when Washington and Lee picked its own graduate, Johnny Burns, to be the Democratic nominee, and he got stomped by Coolidge. But nobody expected Burns to be picked. And Dad did the phone calling around, and it was a tie between McAdoo and Al Smith, and the Southern Democrats did not want a Catholic, and so they ended up sticking with McAdoo, and finally they switched over. And he found out how Kentucky was going to ultimately go with this Washington and Lee graduate that nobody had heard about by making phone calls back to the know-it-alls in Frankfort, Kentucky, and then he switched the Kentucky delegation over and they swung it to Burns. And then Burns got the nomination. Mm-hmm. Nobody had ever heard of Burns before that. So you might want to take a look at that dramatic pick and see how it's done this time.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's pretty similar to a lot of our local regional strategy, especially for our state chairs. Still, they're definitely still calling all of the professionals and analysts within their states. And I think hopefully some modern technology makes that a little bit easier on us than it would have been for your father. But yeah, that's definitely still a quintessential part of the mock convention.
And I think that's also part of what makes our mock convention so special is that local approach. And is part of what differentiated us in 2016, where a lot of people looked at things kind of maybe nationwide and had their own kind of factors for why they did or didn't think that Donald Trump would become the nominee. But we looked at everything state by state and determined how each state would vote. And when we added up the numbers, they decided they predicted that it would be Donald Trump, and I think that local approach was really kind of a difference maker in that prediction.
Hi, thanks, guys. Great work. So we want to know, who's it going to be?
It's a great question.
We want to know that too.
We wanted the answer.
Who's on the top contenders and who's on the who list?
So we'll start with the top contenders first. So hands down, the top contenders can be boiled down to just about 4 individuals: Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Kamala Harris. That would be your top dogs, as we like to call them. On the who category, Bill de Blasio's on there. Who else is a who?
Tom Steyer.
Tom Steyer. Joe Sestak is still running for those following the campaign. He has made no campaign events whatsoever, but he has filed. So we're locked in. Along with Wayne Messam, the mayor of West Myanmar, Florida. Also made no campaign stops, but we're tracking him very closely. So it's safe to say that the who category has about maybe like 10 or 12 names on it, and top contenders are only around 4, which helps us to stratify the 20 into their respective tiers.
Did anything change because of the debates last night? Have you moved anybody on the chart to a different position based on those last night?
That is a great question, and we actually had a debate watch party in this room last night, and if you guys tuned into the debates, I'm sure that you could follow what happened to us, where we started off with about 50 people in the room, excited and ready to go, and then we looked around at 10:15, and there was about 6 of us in here, and so we kept on going. So in my personal opinion for what I saw last night, I don't think much will change based on what happened. It was fairly the same talking points we saw in the first and second debates, but in both those debates we had breakout moments. In the June one, Kamala Harris had her, when she talked about the busing and about how she was the individual affected by the busing that Joe Biden opposed. That was a big bump for her. Then over in the July debates, Booker had a nice showing, but last night, I personally didn't see anything. Valerie might have a different opinion, which is why we like to talk about these things amongst the team to get the opinion. But for me, I don't think much has changed.
Okay. Yeah, I would pretty much agree with John. I thought that we were actually looking at the debate schedule, and we were commenting on how 6 debates is a lot, and there's a lot to talk about, but it seems like the commentators keep wanting to talk about the same topics, which doesn't. I feel like we're having the same debates over and over again about healthcare, about gun control, about immigration. So I think it's going to get harder and harder for candidates to have a breakout moment as these debates progress. So for the most part, yeah, I would agree with John that really not much has changed from where we were before the debates. I think we saw that Castro had a bit of a bad moment at the debates, but he hasn't been quite in the top contenders category also, so that's not really going to affect the race much.
He made it out of the WHO category about 2 months ago.
Yeah.
We got someone back there.
This may have been discussed earlier, but I didn't hear it, so I'm going to ask it. How are you selected to be in the positions you're in?
So there's kind of a few different phases. So for myself, Elizabeth and John, we are the tri-chairs, so as kind of the general financial and political chairs, we were the first ones to be selected. And I think we had about 3 months of applications and interviews. So we turned in an application with some kind of a written portion. I had an interview with a panel of a bunch of previous MockCon members in the executive committee room. So they had their, it was a little scary. I've never had to, thankfully, sit in the executive committee room. But that was, so that was a lot because there was just, probably a dozen people interviewing me at once. And then after that, we had 2 rounds where we were given a scenario, that was kind of perhaps related to the past mock convention, and we were asked how to solve it. And they were really, I think, trying to see, whether or not, we'd be capable of, solving a tough problem. And then after that, we had kind of a lunch and dinner interview, and we got our confirmation that we'd gotten the spots about an hour before I left for fancy dress. So it was kind of a big day, my freshman year fancy dress and being appointed to MockCon. And then past that, after it started with just John, Elizabeth, and I, every semester we've held kind of recruiting where people would submit an application and then we would interview people. And that's how we've kind of grown the team steadily, first from just 3 to then we had about 150 members. And as of last week, where the rest of the student body signed up, we're now, over 1,600 in total. So it's been, quite a long process getting to it.
Yeah. For me, personally, as the regional chair, we were all hired last fall, so it was my sophomore year, where we had just 1 written application and 1 interview, so not nearly as long and drawn out as for these guys. And then, we were added to the team in last winter.
Yeah, one back there.
The gentleman from Kentucky referred to the most famous or infamous Democratic convention in 1924 where a Washington and Lee graduate got the nomination. There is a book, and it's available in the bookstore, called Davis versus Coolidge, and it is written by Garland Tucker, who is a Washington and Lee alumnus and who also is running for Congress in the Republican primary in North Carolina. So if you're interested in that, it's a very well-written book.
Put it on my list, thank you.
If you want to feel better about Washington and Lee, come and watch our students in action, right? Guys, tremendous. Thank you so much, and Professor Strong and Alexander.